people become a certain age where they really start to worry about, am I forgetting more? Is this normal aging? Is this something more like Alzheimer's and dementia? So I think it's what causes people to not go to the doctor, maybe is when they should, because what if it is Alzheimer's, or what if it is dementia? What if they do tell me? And just the fear behind it, because it is an awful disease.
Let's start off with stigmas.
Mhm.
What would you say are the most common stigmas that face Alzheimer's and dementia?
I would say, just to begin with, just the disease itself. Obviously nobody wants it. And I think people become a certain age where they really start to worry about, am I forgetting more? Is this normal aging? Is this something more like Alzheimer's and dementia? So I think it's what causes people to not go to the doctor, maybe is when they should, because what if it is Alzheimer's, or what if it is dementia? What if they do tell me? And just the fear behind it, because it is an awful disease. So I think that just in itself of going and making that first step of getting a diagnosis is huge. It's also, if you do have the diagnosis, of how are people going to treat me? Are they going to treat me differently? Are they going to coddle me? Are they going to not talk to me the same way that they always have? And we've seen that in, there's films out there that do a pretty good job of depicting a scenario or a family that's going through this. And I see it when talking with families of, I hear the individual with the disease saying, they do treat me differently, or, maybe they don't want me watching my grandkids now. And so all of those fears of what's to come or what may come down the line, and is just all there when talking about this disease. And also friends. Sometimes we see friends who don't necessarily, maybe in a sense, have a choice, if you will, of sticking around or not. Sometimes that's a fear of losing friends and losing some of those close relationships and things changing.
You think there's a lot of denial with this disease?
Yes. Sometimes with the individual, because sometimes they don't see the changes, but also with family members, of thinking that their loved one is going to get better. There's good and bad days with this disease. And on a good day, it's easy for family members to think, maybe there's even a good week, consecutively, a few good days. And so sometimes it's easy for families to think, oh, this person is getting better. And there's that hope of that maybe it's not Alzheimer's or dementia. Maybe the doctor was wrong. And then something happens, a memory is forgotten, or something like that happens. And then it just comes crashing down and kind of makes you remember that, oh, okay, this is not going to get better. And sometimes we don't think it's as bad as maybe somebody else's situation. And so we downplay the disease sometimes.
And I would imagine that the slow play sometimes of the disease too makes it so you don't maybe react as quickly as you should, because forgetting sometimes is a slow progression, it just becomes normal. Mm-hmm. And I'm not certain of this, is it part of a regular, say, like yearly checkup or something like that doctors make that part of their visit? Like, do they do cognitive testing typically? What's the situation there?
Sure. So once someone is on Medicare, during their wellness visit, they should be getting a yearly cognitive test. So the first year that somebody is on, gets on Medicare, the doctor should be giving them a yearly cognitive test, as well as, their physical and everything else that's included. Unfortunately, I do hear where there are many individuals who aren't getting that. And so sometimes it's left upon that individual to advocate for that part of the wellness visit.
So do you think this is something that should be advocated for earlier as well?
Earlier than the age of 65, earlier than the age of
Yeah, if
Medicare.
it becomes part of the regular Medicare process, would it be wise to start that process earlier on an individual basis before the requirement?
Yeah. I think that would be nice, because we are seeing more and more people who are diagnosed before the age of 65 or before the age that they're getting on Medicare. So yes, that would be great to start some of those baseline testings prior to that age.
So with these stigmas that we talked about before, that denial or that fear, what would you say, first of all, to the individual who may be experiencing it, to go get tested as early as possible?
Mm-hmm. I think the first and foremost thing is that, it may not be dementia. It may be a thyroid issue. It may be high stress. It could be a vitamin deficiency. There's so many different things, depression, so many different things that can mimic dementia, that you do want to rule out some of those things. That I've talked to people in the earlier time of where they're questioning, do they have a memory issue or memory concern? And some of them, it has come out that they're deficient in vitamin B, or something else was going on at the time. Or I spoke with one individual who also had a diagnosis of ADHD, and sometimes that was, now in the future, she very well could get dementia, but at that point it was just some of the sign or symptoms of her ADHD that was contributing to some of the confusion and memory loss, which really wasn't memory loss. It was the distractions during her conversations because of her ADHD. So I would definitely say, checking with your doctor, because it definitely could be something else. But also, with all of the research that is coming out in the world of Alzheimer's and dementia, there are treatments now that if you start early enough, and it's okay, you talk about it with your doctor. There are medications that can maybe help slow down the progression of the disease, and we're only going to see more and more of those. Hopefully, those kinds of treatments, and hopefully one day a cure for the disease as well. But yeah, starting as soon as possible, because the current medications, you do have to be on them at the earliest time of the disease.
So there is significant benefit to identifying earlier, and comment on this phrase: is it easier to retain and hold on to than to make ground back up? Or can you even make ground back up in this disease?
What do you mean by that?
So if I were to start on medication, am I going to improve where I'll start remembering things more? Is it easier to retain than it is to regain?
Yeah, so you're not necessarily going to regain any of the memories that maybe you've already lost, but it's going to help slow down the progression of the disease. So if you are a good candidate and you talk to your doctor and you talk about the risks and that sort of thing, and you feel comfortable moving forward with the medication, it can help slow down the progression. So and this is just, I have no idea because everybody is so different. So this is just an example, but maybe if you didn't take the medication, you would have progressed, and maybe in 8 or so years you would have passed away with the disease. But if you were on the medication, you would have more time in the earlier stages, where you would have more time with family and have more time with your loved ones and have more time to do things that you like to do. And you may see many more years. Um, and I'm not at all saying, yeah, like everybody should go get on the medication. Like that's not what I'm saying, but I am saying it's an option. And I think as time goes on and we just get more and more done in the research area, there's going to be more and more options for people, and knowing what those options are earlier rather than later can only be helpful for people.
So what would you recommend a loved one says to a person who may be experiencing it, may be experiencing some of that denial or fear? Because I'm sure denial comes from fear.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of soft language would you, or hard language would you recommend that a loved one say, hey, this is something we need to deal with now. We need to address it, to not just let it linger.
Sure. So I think there's a couple things to consider is who should have that conversation with them. We'll just say, for example, it's getting to the doctor to maybe start some of the testing. I've seen some, you can kind of test the waters a little bit, and some of it's going to, you have to take that person's personality into consideration. How have they handled difficult conversations before this? Of course, this is a whole different ball game. You may not haven't had to have this conversation with this person before, having to do with this disease, but taking some of those things into consideration, taking the time of day into consideration, who should have that conversation, because sometimes it may not be the spouse that should have that conversation. Sometimes it's not the adult child who's been closest to them. Maybe it's a friend who starts that conversation. I think those things can help. And you may not want to lay it all out on them, like every little thing that you've noticed, because that can be maybe overwhelming. But maybe pick out a couple things and just kind of see, and say, have you noticed anything changing with your memory? These are a couple things that I've noticed. And then if they say, depending on how that goes, it could be that, they say, yeah, I have noticed, but I just didn't know where to go or where to start. Offering to go with that person to the doctor if they feel comfortable with whoever it is that's having the conversation, just being a support. Or it could very well be the other way of like, no, I'm fine. I haven't noticed anything. And that could be part of the denial. It could be the part of their brain that just is telling them that they don't feel any differently. They don't feel like anything has changed. Some people are aware that things are changing and some people aren't. So if you run into a situation where they are maybe seeming in denial, or they shut you down immediately, let that happen. Maybe having to change the subject, and trying to bring it up at another time, because getting them upset it's not going to go anywhere. So we do sometimes recommend having multiple conversations. It may be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times of having the conversation. We can't force people to do something that they don't want to do. And but sometimes it is just finding that right person. Sometimes for that individual, it's hearing it from multiple people. Sometimes they just need to find that one person who it just clicks of like, okay, maybe I should go and get tested.
Is there, I guess, is resistance usually the most common? I mean, is there a common denominator that you've seen professionally that that on average most people react like this, react like that? I mean, is there? I'm just trying to think of, like, if we wanted to try to present some strategies, what are some of the most common responses to that conversation or conversations?
Sure. I would say that probably on the majority of it, there is a little bit of that resistance. I really, I would say it was rare. It's been rare to meet with a family and they say, I had the conversation and it went perfectly and they went and made the appointment the next day. That's pretty rare, unless if the individual is already aware of some of the changes and they are the ones that bring it up to a family member. So yeah, I do think that in the majority of times there is that resistance. Again, this is a disease. There's no cure for it. And it's scary. It's really scary. So working with that resistance and bringing it up at another time, maybe sharing some resources with them of somebody else, maybe if they know somebody or maybe they've read a story about someone that had maybe a good experience of going to the doctor and finding out that they had this disease and this is the journey that they've been on. That could be helpful. Again, there's just so many personalities out there that sometimes you just have to kind of wade the waters a little bit and figure out what has worked, because again, there's going to be certain words that you're going to find out that, okay, I can't use that word. Sometimes easing into it of just saying memory loss, not using the word Alzheimer's or dementia, especially if there's a family history and you already know that that person is fearful of getting the disease because maybe their parent had it and they know how they've already been through that as a caregiver. So they already have that fear kind of ingrained in them. And so bringing it up very carefully if you have noticed some of those changes, and saying something along the lines of memory loss, or let's just go get checked out, because you could be dealing with somebody who doesn't go to the doctor at all for anything, and so that can be really challenging too.
Any other red flag words pop in your mind?
In that initial conversation, not necessarily in the meetings that I've had with families, those two, like sometimes people, I would say Alzheimer's is the most scariest word. Sometimes people are okay with dementia. Memory loss is it's a lot less definite, I guess. But that one in particular is the one that really stands out for me.
So what tools or what words would you recommend based upon the fact that there are options, there is research, there's options? What words would you suggest to people that they could utilize, or conversation threads that they could utilize when they do face that resistance or denial of trying to get checked out?
Yeah. Using I statements, it stands out to me. I feel, or I have seen, rather than saying, the other day I saw you, put a document in the refrigerator, or the other day you called your son by your husband's name. Using the I statements of, I feel concerned. I feel maybe we should go to the doctor. Sometimes that can just make it a little less on that person of like, you have a problem, so we need to go get you fixed, or we need to go see what is going on with you. Sometimes that can be helpful.
For like doing for others as well, like this is about us, or for let's get checked out so the kids don't worry, or some of those approaches.
Yeah, and sometimes assuming that, you're a family member, somebody that's very close to that individual, you're going to know some of their fears, and you're going to know, maybe they do care. Well, I'm sure they care about their children. And so, maybe you do kind of add that in for a little bit of encouragement of why they should go, of like, we just want to make sure that you're okay, so the kids aren't worrying, or something along those lines, because sometimes that can really be a useful tactic in trying to get that person to go get diagnosed, or get start the testing assessments.
So let's say that we're before the Medicare time, which is 65, correct? Ish. If I, or if someone is concerned about a loved one, are they allowed to reach out to their doctor and say, hey, next time she's in or he's in, I've noticed these things? I mean, is that appropriate? I have no clue.
Yeah. So there are HIPAA laws. So the doctor may not, is probably not going to say, this person is even a patient here. So it may have to be you saying, hey mom, I don't have anything going on, and I know you have a doctor's appointment coming up. Maybe we can get coffee before and I'll go with you. And then maybe while you're there, maybe you write up something that you can just pass along to the nurse to pass on to the doctor, about, hey, can you, maybe jot down some things that you've noticed. Can you maybe check this person's memory? That may feel a little icky to some people, of like they're going around that person's back. It's one option. You can always talk to that individual too that you're concerned about, and say, hey, would you mind if I brought up some concerns that I've seen? And if you've already had that conversation, with them, rather than springing it on them and in front of them, that could cause some issues. But I have had family members who, aren't on the emergency contact list or are on no papers anywhere, that will write some notes. If they by chance have access to like a My Chart or something like that, maybe putting it in there. But I would say most people, I don't have my mom's My Chart information, or, whatever. But, that could, for some people, that could be another option.
And just in general, writing stuff down when you go to the doctor is probably a pretty good idea too, especially when it comes to this disease.
Yes. That is always something. Journaling, on the caregivers, if the person is early enough in the disease, maybe they jot down some questions too. That way they feel like they're involved in their care. Or if they are having troubles writing, maybe they do come up with some questions, but the caregiver or care partner is, write some things down for them so that the question can be asked. And they may not remember having that conversation with their loved one of like, oh, I didn't know I had that question. But on the caregiver side, journaling, even daily things, if it was a good day, bad day, if they maybe remembered how to do a task that they didn't remember yesterday, jotting those things down can only be helpful for not only yourself to kind of judge, because sometimes it's really hard to judge the progression and where things really start to decline, because it does happen so gradually. And but it can help the doctor as well, of seeing, okay, they were here and doing these things in January, but by June, you can definitely see some changes.
And just technology just popped in my brain here, because obviously texting is a very common way. Maybe if you have a group, if it's a family with children or friends that regularly visit with, maybe it's a good idea to maybe start like a chain where it says, hey, I stopped in to visit so-and-so. We had a great day. Called me by my husband's name a couple times, but other than that, pretty good.
Yeah, especially when there's multiple siblings or multiple people involved in that individual's care. Keeping everybody in the loop is only going to help the care of that individual, and is only going to help the people who are helping care, whether it's a professional caregiver coming in, whether it's family members, whether it's a neighbor coming in, and helping with, maybe meds or mowing the grass even. I mean, just general communication. Open communication can only help the family dynamic and the care dynamic.
Generally speaking, what are the phases of this disease? Because I've heard mild cognitive impairment.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard early onset. I've heard mid, or I've heard terms that kind of give me like a beginning, middle, end. Can you kind of define those for us, please?
Yeah, so there's asymptomatic, which is before you don't see any symptoms. When we're talking about the disease itself, the brain starts to change depending on what journal or what research you're looking at, 20 to 30 years before the disease, you really start seeing any symptoms. So we consider that asymptomatic. There's no outward symptoms. Some people may have the diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, and sometimes that can be due to Alzheimer's, and you only find that out with further testing. Sometimes mild cognitive impairment does not turn into Alzheimer's, and that person is just kind of stagnant in some of that memory loss, and brief confusion from time to time. Alzheimer's, we consider there to be 3 stages. So early stages where that individual is really able to do still everything that they've always been able to do. I mean, we have individuals in the early stages who still drive, who still work, may not work in the capacity that they were working, but maybe they're phasing out, getting ready to retire, or their employer is working with them to change up some of their job tasks. But there's some lapses in memory from time to time. They're repeating themselves from time to time. It may not be an everyday thing. It may not be frequently throughout their day, but it's still very early in the disease. Middle stages is the second stage, if you will, where it typically lasts the longest. Things are starting to decline. You may see that person is having even more challenges with memory, more challenges with repeating themselves, more challenges with confusion, more challenges with completing tasks. They're probably not working like if they were working prior. They may still be able to do some of the tasks, but there definitely more is being put on the caregiver. More is being put on the family members, if there's multiple family members involved. This is the stage that we will a lot of times tell families, figuring out, and this is going to change, but figuring out what tasks, what can that individual still do, and focus on that, because even if they're in the middle stages, they still need socialization, they still need connection, and they still want to feel like they're contributing. They want to have that purpose. So letting them do those tasks that they're still able to do on their own, figuring out what those tasks are that they need help with, and doing it with them rather than for them. And then the late stages is where that person needs 24-hour care. So probably not doing too many tasks, if any. Communication, maybe a few words. And of course, everybody's very different, but maybe a few words. Communication through talking is a lot more difficult. Communication in the late stages may very well be most of it coming from the caregiver. I talked about connection. So if they like to read, it may be reading to them, maybe from their favorite books, or if it was poetry, or if it was songs, reading that to them. Still reading the newspaper. If they read the newspaper every day, read the newspaper to them. touch is still very important. So making sure that you're hugging them and or maybe a soft touch to the arm or holding their hand. Um, we say to still use they're still able to use the five senses of smells. So bringing in smells, if you know that they loved cookies, bringing in cookies for them to smell, it can make them feel happy. You may see like a change in their personality just by certain smells. Um, Sight can be, if they maybe like to walk, still taking them for walks. They may be in a wheelchair. Some of them may not be. Some individuals may still be able to walk, but taking them for walks, it may be slower. You may not get very far, but still doing those things, incorporating some of those things that they always like to do. Bird watching, for instance, maybe taking them somewhere, if they're still able to get in a car, taking them somewhere, or bringing it to them if they're not able to get out. Maybe it's bringing pictures to them of birds or whatever those things, activities that they like to do, and still incorporating those things, because I think sometimes we can get so stuck on, they're not able to talk anymore, so, but they can still hear, they can still see. Body language is very important, especially that starts early on, really, but really in the middle and late stages, it's really important. Our tone of voice, especially if you have someone who gets confused very easily, because their perception of what is being said or how it's being said can change. And you may say something very nice, but the way that they hear it is maybe a demand to them. It feels like a demand to them, or it feels like you're telling them what to do. And so we do sometimes have to be careful of how we say things, especially if there's a lot of confusion. But body language is very important. If they're sit next to them or sit across from them. Don't be standing up, because that can feel, like you're maybe in a more of authority position. If you're crossing your arms, they may take that as you being mad. So yeah, those things that not all the time do we think about, communication. There are definitely ways to still communicate and still connect with a loved one throughout those stages, the disease.
So what I gathered from that, it's because, I mean, we are who we are, but we really need to think about how they're experiencing the world, mm-hmm. and be very cognizant of how our loved one is experiencing the world, because they are still perceiving these things, even though we may not be getting that feedback. Mm-hmm. But like you said, even going for a walk or a drive, that's still stimulation that's occurring into their mind, whether it's something they've never seen before or you've driven by 1,000 times. Yeah. And even though you may not get a reaction, we need to fight that perception that ourselves that they're not, mm-hmm. perceiving anything.
Mm-hmm. And this sometimes will happen commonly between like early and middle stages, that we can think that they're not interested in doing something because they're not the ones initiating, like, hey, I want to go for a walk, or I want to go, and look at the birds. And so it can be easy for us to say like, oh, they're just not interested in that particular thing anymore because they're not asking about it. Now, if you do try and do some sort of activity and they become very frustrated, or because maybe it's like somebody who was a woodworker and they're not able to put things together anymore, there are still ways to make it a safe activity. Again, it could be looking through pictures. It could be getting blocks or Legos, like the bigger Legos, and they're still, building and doing things with their hands. May not look like it used to, but it's something that you can incorporate that's a little bit simpler for them to be able to do, and it's keeping them engaged, it's keeping them stimulated of something that they can still do. But yeah, sometimes I have seen that of where, because that person is not initiating, that it's not something that we should maybe still incorporate.
And then on the other end of that, to not make the assumption that they don't want to do something, because it's I've seen where someone is resistant to maybe going down to listen to someone play piano. I don't want to go do that. I don't want to do that. But then once they get there, they
Yes.
are completely just engaged 100%. How often does that happen? And what recommendations would you have in that situation when the individual is closing off, but that stimulation, when they are there, they enjoy it and they benefit from it? How do you communicate getting from point A to point B in that situation?
Yeah. And sometimes it's like the fear of the unknown, or maybe it's even that they're not able to process what you're saying anymore, of, let's go down and listen to music. They may not be able to process what that actually means. So it could just be saying, let's go for a walk. And as you're going for a walk, you just so happen to come across this musician who's playing music, and they're like, you might see their head start bobbing, or they're just pleasantly sitting there. Sometimes it's just too much information to say, let's go down and listen to some music, or let's go do whatever activity it is. Sometimes that can just be too much of their brain trying to plan what that means. So just make kind of simplifying, and just say, hey, let's just go for a walk, or come with me. Just come with me, and that could be as simple as it is. And it's like it's like a spontaneous thing of, we just happen to come across this activity. Sometimes it's just very overwhelming for someone to think about, what does that mean to go listen to music? And it's a new environment in their mind. It can be a new environment because I'm getting out of my regular environment. Sometimes just that can be very overwhelming for them.
So in the different ranges of early, middle, and late, are there some common, again, we know that everyone's unique. We know that everyone's personality is different, and family dynamics and interpersonal communication is obviously very, very unique to each of us. But are there some common behaviors that occur, and how do we best communicate through those behaviors?
I would say the more common behaviors that we see are depression and anxiety. Sometimes that person may have depression prior to getting this disease. There is a link between depression and Alzheimer's, but sometimes just the thought of knowing what's coming down the line can be very overwhelming and cause some of that depression. And then just the anxiety of not being able to remember, certain information throughout the day, of taking out the trash, for instance, of like, did I take out the trash? I don't remember if I took out the trash. Now I'm gonna have to get up and, look out the window, or, and I'm trying to lay down to sleep, and did I remember to do everything that I was supposed to do during the day? So some of that anxiety around that, some of the anxiety of allowing somebody else to start taking care of some of the everyday tasks, medications and bills and appointments, and all of those things can be very overwhelming and cause some of that anxiety. Wandering, and this could happen at any stage. I would say more commonly maybe in the middle or late stages, but it could still happen early on in the earlier stages as well, where somebody may get lost. They're in a new environment and they take a wrong turn. One interesting fact is, whatever dominant hand they are, a lot of times that is the way, if they're a wanderer, that is the way that they go. I learned that a couple of years ago, actually. So that, and I'm sure that doesn't happen 100% of the time, but sometimes that may be a helpful hint of, like, if somebody does happen to wander out of the home, maybe start with, going to the right if they're right-handed. Um, so wandering can be another behavior that sometimes happens, and there are things that caregivers can do to mitigate the wandering. So the wandering in the home, if they're just kind of going from room to room and they're safe, and you've cleared the rugs, you've cleared the cords, and it's a safe walkway. Maybe there's no stairs. The wandering, the shuffling, the wandering, that's okay. They're also getting exercise during that time too, if you can think about it that way. Um, but sometimes, putting cameras in the home can be of help. Putting a lock at the top of the door or at the bottom of the door, on the exit doors, can sometimes help too, because a lot of times an individual with dementia is very focused on what's in front of them, that they don't see. They're not looking up above, they're not looking down below. So just an extra lock can be helpful. Alarms as well can be helpful, especially if that individual is, or the caregiver is, living in the home with them. Um, those three are very common behaviors. We also see aggression many times as well, or just irritation, um, frustration, those words, because they're not able to complete tasks like they used to, or they're not able to remember information like they used to. And so some of that communication that we were talking about can come into play, where we say, when we are still able to communicate with them by words, is, when you are tripped up on a word, do you want me to try and help you and try to figure out? Because for some people that could be even more frustrating. Or do you just want me to give you some time and let you try and come up with it on your own? And that gives that person a say in how they want to be treated and how they want the other person to react. So that can be helpful. And even saying, moving forward, how would you like me to handle this situation? Now, that can change, and then we'll have to, readjust. Um, but sometimes early on, if you can have those conversations around, what would you like me to do if this comes up? Um, the aggression and some of those behaviors can be mitigated based on how you react to them or what you say. And a lot of times that is trial and error. You don't know necessarily, especially when you're beginning in all of this, you don't know what the trigger words are going to be. But once you, I spoke with somebody one time who, for their loved one, it was the word now. So it's time to go now, or we have to leave now. And he found out that the word now for her it felt demanding. And so, how many times did that have to happen though for him to realize, okay, it must be this word. And for so many families, it's going to happen. We're not gonna catch on right away of what the triggers are. And so giving them that grace, giving yourself that grace of, okay, but once we figure out that there's a certain word that we're using, or maybe it's a certain way that you're approaching that person. We typically recommend approaching them from the front, not from behind or from the side, because sometimes with Alzheimer's, the peripheral vision declines, and if they don't see you coming from behind, or some of that confusion, and you're behind them and you're talking to them, you may see them like look around, they don't see anybody in their vision, so they don't know who's talking to them, and that can cause a whole lot of confusion. So approaching them from the front, saying their name so they know that you are talking to them, maybe even addressing yourself of, I'm John, I'm your son, and start on with the conversation. Sometimes that can be helpful, especially if they're in a place where they don't remember who you are. Um, I'll talk about self-care too, because as far as the caregivers go, taking care of yourself is going to allow you to have more patience, because when you don't have the patience and you snap, you I've already told you this, or don't you remember, you know, that can put them on the defense and bring up some, they're going to feel defensive, and then they may say something that, they can't control all the time how they're going to react. And so it's really up to us to control how we react, how we respond, how we approach. Um, and sometimes, like I said, that can mitigate some of those behaviors. Hallucinations is also another behavior that can come up that can be really concerning for families. I think it's probably one of the, aside from the aggression or the frustrations of knowing how to handle it, it can be really scary for families of knowing what to say and what to do, when somebody thinks that somebody or something is there that's not there, or maybe they think somebody is still alive who's not alive, that they just spoke to. And what we typically say is going with it as much as you can. If they say, well, there's children outside, and it's, midnight, and you know that there's no children outside, but they even auditorily or visually see, that there's children outside, you can just say, you know what, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to tell them it's time to stop playing. And sometimes just that can mitigate, maybe not future hallucinations, but in that moment, for them. And they can feel validated too, because when you tell them, well, there's no kids out there, it's midnight, that's not going to stop it's going to cause some issues, because for them, that's their reality, that yes, there are children out there, and how dare you tell me that there's not when I see them, I hear them. So just going along with it. If they said that they had a conversation with someone who did not visit that day, well, how are they doing? There's no harm in going along with it. There is harm in saying, well, Susie wasn't here today, because again, their reality is, yes, they were. So, and that can be, again, that's an adjustment. So again, giving yourself grace of like, oh, I didn't do that the first time. A lot of this disease is trial and error, and you've never had to deal with this necessarily before, so you don't have the tools always up front. But once you realize that, okay, this approach, this reaction is not working, then it's time to start educating yourself and figuring out what are some different ways that I can approach this situation. So I would say those are the behaviors that commonly we see when it comes to this disease.
It's, what I'm getting theme wise from this conversation today is that, especially for the loved one and the caregiver, that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but probably the best first step is to, again, enter their world and try to fit within how they're perceiving things, because it's easy to meet frustration with frustration. It's easy to meet aggression with aggression. It's very easy to be like, there's no one out there. You say there is, but there isn't. And look, that straight up, that is a challenge. What would you say to encourage someone? Because there are certain personalities that find it difficult to enter that world, where they do want to just bring that person back. And especially when it's something so, there's no one out there, that's so common sense. Again, because we're all built differently, what would you say to encourage everyone is like, let your first step be to try to perceive how they're perceiving?
I know that there are some programs out there. We do it like on a small scale, at some of the events that we attend, the dementia experience. I know there's a few facilities in town who do, I'm not sure what they call it, virtual dementia tour. Don't quote me on that wording, but it's kind of like a virtual reality, if you will, of like how sight changes sometimes with this disease. As I mentioned, like the peripheral vision can change. Um, how if you take this step right here, how sometimes that can look very small or even taller, which can then cause falls. Um, hearing, um, hearing changes, um, being feeling like your hands are like really your fingers are like really thick, and how sometimes it can be hard to those motor skills of figuring something out. um, I know one of the experiences that we do is like we have a button up shirt and we put like really thick gloves on, and then we tell the individual to button up the shirt, and for the most part it's really hard to do. And that's again very small scale of what it's like to have this disease. But sometimes those experiences, I've had caregivers come out and just be like, whoa, like that is almost what it's like to have this disease and not being able to carry out some of those tasks, or not being able to another one of the things that they do is somebody's like screaming at them. They'll have somebody yelling at them, and but then they'll be telling them uh, to turn on the TV. So there's like all these distractions, and then you're being told to do a particular task, and how overwhelming that could be, um, just for anybody. So I recommend those if there's any programs in the area to check those out, because I do think those are helpful for families, but also reading as much as you can on the disease and trying to truly understand the brain changes that occur, um, can really be helpful in especially in those really frustrating times where they're asking you the same question over and over again, and it's like, okay, I have to take a breath, and practicing in those more calm moments. I know that I do recommend that to families, and I know it sounds silly, but like practicing breath work in calm moments can help in those really stressful moments. Um, and of course, that sounds simple, but when you're in the midst of a really stressful situation, we don't always remember to just breathe for a couple minutes before we respond. Um, and practicing, whether that's internally processing, or externally processing in a mirror or with a friend, of um, realizing that it's not their fault, that this is part of the disease. It is normal. Or I shouldn't say it's part of the disease. It can be normal for hallucinations to happen, which I do want to say too. Sometimes that can be a medication, or something that has changed. Maybe somebody's environment has changed that has brought on these hallucinations. Um, that we just have to be aware of, that can happen. And maybe talking with other people who's experienced, whether it's a caregiver support group, or getting online and Googling some of the online dashboards that are available, can sometimes for some people be helpful.
With medications, would it be good to, I mean, obviously talk to the doctor and
Yes,
pharmacist?
yes. Both are great resources to say, hey, like, or could the combination of two medications be causing, some of this too. But yeah, I mean, we have run into family members who are very reluctant to enter their reality because it's just so foreign to them. They've never had to deal with hallucinations before, or they've never had to deal with this particular situation. That it just sometimes it just takes time, and over time they become a little bit more comfortable with it.
I think with that in particular, because I also think friends in that situation, because it almost turns into a snowball effect where it's like, okay, my loved one is now, or my friend is now not able to communicate the way that we used to communicate. So therefore, I, as the friend or loved one, begin to withdraw. And then for your loved one, they're now having someone withdraw from them. So there's lack of stimuli and more isolation of not only the relationship, but for both individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. We see that with family members and with friends, where they're just not comfortable with some of the changes and some of the communication changes that they have to now make for that individual, that they'll start to withdraw, unfortunately.
Yeah, and again, I'm still just struck by the first step being enter their world the best you can, especially when you were talking about the later stages when they're nonverbal and stuff. I would think that, I mean, just my heart during that statement is, I can see how easy it is to just sit there because my loved one's not reacting. You get this sense on the inside that they're no longer there. So what's the point of going out for a drive? What's the point of reading the newspaper or a book to them, or commenting, having something on TV and be like, well, wasn't that funny? What that was, I see just from this conversation, I see the value of and the importance of still engaging at all stages of this disease.
Yeah. Because you really don't ever know what's going to still maybe click for them. I know that there are some people who music is one of the last things to go with this disease. I've seen where people, you're not able to communicate with a loved one, and then you play a particular song of, maybe it was their favorite song when they were in their 20s or 30s, and they'll sing you every word. And so the importance of just music alone can be just phenomenal. And I think for everybody that may be a different thing. Sometimes it may be a picture of a grandchild's, a picture that a grandchild draws, and just seeing them smile. They may not be able to tell you anything. They may not be able to talk to you, but just seeing them smile is, I think, worth it, because I think you can get a lot from knowing that somebody is smiling, right? And again, they may just stare at it, and because we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know if it's making any kind of reaction sometimes to them internally. But sometimes, every once in a while, you may get something of that, and then that just makes it all worth it. So yeah, never stop trying, and all you can do is try different things. And I think it may be really hard, like you had mentioned. For some people, it doesn't come naturally to make some of those adjustments, or to even look something up or research something. It doesn't come natural. But as long as we know that somebody is trying, that's all we can really ask for.
And I get from that, and I think that for the individual who is still a caregiver and involved, I think, and again, what just struck me from what you just said is that even if you aren't getting a smile or a reaction, we have two choices. We can choose that it's doing no good, or we can hope. We can hope that there's an impact. And if there's hope that there's an impact, it's worth doing. Right. We've talked a lot about communication and behaviors today. What does the Alzheimer's organization have available to address this particular topic? Just a few items that they would have to empower, educate someone at any stage of this disease to deal with communication and behavior with doctors, with their loved ones, with family members, for themselves. What resources are available?
Yeah, so I think one of the first steps is our website, alz.org, and just some of that gathering some of that general information of some general ways to communicate with a loved one, or some general information about behaviors and how to respond to some of the behaviors. You can look up that on those resources on our website. We also have what we call tip sheets that we can email or mail out to families, and we have them, hundreds of different tip sheets on how to communicate with the doctor, how to choose a long-term care facility, and the conversations to have when you're going to visit those communities, what questions to ask somebody who's coming into the home to make sure that you're getting the right home care agency in, eating issues and how to or some strategies on how to get them to eat, dressing themselves and or helping with the individual getting dressed. So we have tons of tip sheets that we can help families with, as well as through care consultations. Care consultations are where a social worker will talk over the phone and provide some of those strategies, suggestions, just listen to some of your frustrations, and help throughout that journey. We also have a 24-hour helpline that people can call any time of the day, and also be transferred to an on-call social worker that, we know that people are not dealing with this disease just between 8 and 5. So on a weekend, on a holiday, where things can sometimes be very overwhelming for that individual, where there's more family maybe coming over, and maybe it's at a family member's house that they're not used to going to. There's so many different things that can go on during the holidays, but having a conversation with somebody and getting some suggestions can sometimes be helpful as well. Caregiver support groups, where caregivers can learn from others and what they've been through and things that they've done that have worked or haven't worked. And then also our education programs. We have one education program on ways to communicate with a loved one with this disease, and then we have a separate one on behaviors and how to respond and how to approach some of the behaviors that can come along.
Anything else you'd like to mention on this topic before we wrap this session up? I know there were a few topics on here that we had initially talked about that I think deserve standalones. Okay. As we had gotten into this conversation.
Yeah. No, I think that really covers the majority of just reiterating, figuring out what some of those triggers are for that individual can really mitigate some of those behaviors that you see. And self-care. Self-care helps with just being able to approach somebody and respond to some of the behaviors that we talked about. I think just reiterating those couple of things.
Just again, the importance of no matter your personality, trying to put yourself in the frame of mind of the person that you love. Because I've heard it described like this, because you gave some great examples, like, try to remember 3 words while someone's, banging a couple blocks by your head and you're static and you're wearing these hot gloves or whatever. Yeah. It's almost, it would be like, this is an example. All right, Dakota, I know that you think that we're sitting in the studio of WBGU right now with cameras and lights, but we're really on Mars.
Right.
And it's not 2025, it's 3004. That's the reality. I know this all seems real to you, but we're really on Mars and it's 3004.
Yeah.
Now believe that.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I know that sounds outlandish, but when they think they're in 1958, it's 1958. And like you said, when they think that there are kids out there, they think there are kids out there. Or even worse, someone's trying to break in.
Yep.
Someone's looking to do me or someone harm.
Yeah.
And our perception is that's not real at all. But like you said, it is so real to them.
And when dealing with somebody who really is just totally against, not even, I shouldn't even say against, but sometimes is so uncomfortable that they can't even get themselves to try to, get into somebody else's reality. It makes it really hard. And sometimes it's again one of those things where it's like not the first conversation, that you have to kind of work with that person of like just getting used to the idea of saying like just go along with it. And it's sometimes for some individuals it's very gradual. Like I think of like, two 90-year-olds who have been married for 60 years, and now you want me to, try and go along with my wife who's, seeing things. It can be really hard for somebody who's just not used to it. Like I came from a certain extent of the mental health background, so that kind of thing is I guess almost ingrained in me. When somebody is hallucinating, it can, just go with it, and because it's not going to do any good trying to tell them that any different. So, but yeah, it can.
But like you said, it is very difficult for a lot of people. I think I would say for most people.
Oh.
To be like,
I mean, even me.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was dealing with that personally, and my mom just started saying all these things, and I'm like, I would have to definitely. I don't know how. Honestly, I couldn't tell you how I would react, even me personally, because it would just be so out of character. And even somebody having that background, it can be really difficult when it is happening to you personally, or somebody close to you. I mean, it's a whole different ball game.
Well, that's a great point where that's where it's a good time to get other people involved in those situations, because when someone's reality is, like we said, it's like their reality is their reality. Whatever they're perceiving at that time is their reality. And whether or not you believe it or not, or you, it's not even believe it, you can't accept it, because like I said, we're sitting here in this studio and you're very clear that you're in that chair having a conversation with me with all these cameras around. But if I say to you,
yeah,
we're on Mars,
I'm gonna be like, no, we're not. And then it's just gonna make me even more agitated, and that's, yeah,
it's tough stuff.
Be like, I got to get out of here. Because this person keeps telling me that I'm wrong,
Yeah.
And that's what happens with somebody with this disease too, or anybody who's having hallucinations. It's that real, and it's just really hard for people to acknowledge and make some of those changes that ultimately need to be made to make that person's life a little bit easier in those scary moments. And that's the other thing, maybe I should have mentioned that too, when
I started up again.
Okay. Some of those behaviors that like hallucinations. One of the things that I will say or ask families is, what is their, so you're telling me that they are seeing children outside. Are they upset? Are they angry? Are they crying? Are they scared? Or are they just like, those children are out there? And if it's just, oh, those children are out there, and you say, I'm going to go, take care of this. I'm going to tell them that, hey, they can't be playing in our yard, and it's fine. But when it comes to a point where it's a hallucination, where it's just over and over, and you can't get that individual to come back down to their calm state of mind, again, it could be a medication that's causing these things, and it's always worth talking to that person's doctor to maybe they can help figure out if it's medically or if it's an environmental, is it a change in environment? Is it, sometimes TV has a lot to do with that too. All the, if they tend to be watching things that are going on in the news, and if there's a war going on and they're watching that, sometimes when they start hearing, loud noises, for instance, they may think that they're physically watching it, they may think that it's actually happening right there. And so monitoring what they're watching and what they're listening to can sometimes be helpful as well.
Yeah. And I think those examples that you used about, putting the gloves on with I can only imagine how much of an impact that makes. And, like I said, we're on Mars. I mean, that's outlandish. Mm-hmm. But sometimes maybe by being outlandish and talking about it, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I can't believe I'm on. Yeah, that's so illogical to me. Mm-hmm. And that if it was true, then, oh my, it's, maybe, that's a good approach, especially for those that have a hard time. It's like the more outlandish you make it, it's like any way to get someone, again, to have that perception of your loved one. And again, that's what I'm getting from this conversation. It's like we all have to just stop and reevaluate which lens we're looking through. Yep. If I'm looking through my lens, I'm probably not going to be very effective.
Right.
But if I look through their lens and try to perceive and understand how they're processing this information, mm-hmm. I'm more likely to be successful. And that makes it easier for everybody.
Yep. And I keep saying this, but that doesn't always come natural for many people. And so to have a support system around them to remind them of like, hey, let's step back and remember that, this person can't help it, or this person, just a reminder of, hey, this is this person's reality. Sometimes it can be like, okay, I need to take a step back and just take a breather and remind myself of that, because it can be a lot. It can be overwhelming for the caregiver to have to constantly remember, like, okay, I got to jump into their reality. And so having that support system too can really, who is on the same page and on board with how you're doing things, whether that's siblings, whether that's a spouse, whether that's a friend, whoever it may be, just to remind you as the caregiver of what's going on and remind you of some of the tactics that can really have a positive outcome too.
And those are some of the things that you address in some of your programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we do care consultations, I would say more times than not, we're asking about support systems. What are your support systems like? Okay, if it's siblings, does everybody seem to be on board? Does everybody have a different idea of how things can go? Because that's going to be, dynamics can really change the course of things too, and make things challenging. And you're not going to, we're not going to be able to fix everything. That's not what we're here for. We're just here to provide options, to provide suggestions, to provide some of that information that what we have heard from other caregivers and what we've experienced ourselves, to make and incorporate best practices for the individual that we know work or have worked, and ultimately provide the best way of life for individuals with this disease.
And the reality of it is you're not going to make it easy, but reaching out will make it less hard.
Right.